Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The sun hung low over Sky City, casting long golden beams across the massive spires that rose from its heart. Arela, the floating continent, drifted high above the clouds, its many islands and landmasses suspended in an unending sky. The land's magic had once been perfect, keeping the vast territories of humans, birdfolk, and wind elves in harmony. But now, the air itself felt heavy, as if the floating continent was teetering on the edge of collapse. General Therian stood on the balcony of the human kingdom's embassy, his sharp gaze fixed on the horizon. His dark military uniform, polished with precision, reflected his disciplined nature. Below, in the city streets, representatives of the three factions filled the plazas, their voices blending into a hum of political tension. Therian was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. His every move, every decision, was calculated, and as the nominee for the humans in the upcoming election, he knew he had to win. The fate of Arela, as far as he was concerned, could only be saved through military strength. He turned as a knock echoed from the door. "Enter," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Captain Larissa, his second in command, strode in, her short-cropped hair and steel-gray eyes matching her sharp demeanor. "The election is only 2 days away, General. The birdfolk are hosting another gathering tonight. Should we attend?" Therian's lip curled in disdain. "Kaler's diplomacy will do nothing to solve the real problem. These talks are a waste of time." Larissa nodded, understanding. "And the wind elves?" "Their chosen one has stirred quite the commotion. I've heard whispers that some humans are even supporting her." "The girl?" Therian scoffed. "She's nothing more than a figurehead, a tool for the elves to manipulate the election. I'll remind them soon enough what true leadership looks like." Therian's belief in his own strength was unshakable. In his mind, the solution to Arela's instability was clear: control the continent through military might. The other factions were too weak, too fragile. They needed a strong hand to guide them, and that hand was his. Across Sky City, in the high towers where the birdfolk clans nested, Elder Kaler watched the winds shift. The air was cool and serene, but Kaler knew better than to trust it. At over 100 years old, his feathers were beginning to fade, but his wisdom had only deepened with age. His people trusted him to guide them, not through force, but through harmony. He looked down at the gathering in the plaza below, where birdfolk ambassadors mingled with humans and wind elves. Sky City had always been a place of peace, a center of unity, but even Kaler could feel the cracks forming beneath the surface. The land was shifting, the magical forces that held Arela afloat were becoming unpredictable. This election wasn't just about choosing a leader, it was about survival. Sren, Kaler's young apprentice, approached from behind. "The human candidate is refusing to attend the evening council again." Kaler sighed. "Therian believes in war, not wisdom. His path leads only to further conflict." "But what of Lyrael, the wind elf?" Sren asked, his voice curious. "She has no experience, yet they call her the chosen one." Kaler's sharp eyes narrowed. "Lyrael's power is undeniable, but her inexperience is a concern. I've lived long enough to know that power without wisdom is dangerous." Sren hesitated, then asked, "Do you think she's truly the one who can restore balance?" "I believe," Kaler said slowly, "that we must be cautious. The winds of change are blowing, but they are unpredictable. We must be ready for what comes, no matter the outcome of this election." High above the spires of Sky City, the wind elves lived among the clouds. Their translucent towers shimmered in the soft light of Arela's twin moons, and the air was filled with the faint hum of magic. Lyrael stood at the edge of one such tower, her gaze distant. Her long, silver hair flowed like the wind itself, her ethereal presence both calming and unsettling. She was the chosen one, the prophesied leader who would emerge in times of great peril to guide her people. Yet Lyrael felt anything but chosen. She was only 20 years old, barely an adult by elven standards, and she had spent most of her life in quiet isolation. learning the ways of wind magic. The weight of the prophecy bore down on her, and though her magical abilities were strong, she had no experience in politics or leadership. Her mentor, Elysia, approached, her flowing robes brushing the ground like whispers. "You're troubled." Lyrael nodded, not turning. "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I see visions of the future, but they're so unclear. The continent is falling apart. The balance is shifting a broken bar, but I don't know how to fix it." Elysia's voice was soft but firm. "You have been chosen because you are connected to Arila's magic. The land speaks to you in ways it does not speak to others. That is why the Wind Elves support you. We trust in your connection to the ancient forces." "But what if it's not enough?" Lyrael whispered. "What if I fail?" Elysia placed a hand on her shoulder. "Failure is not the end, it's a beginning. And sometimes, to bring balance, sacrifices must be made." Lyrael's heart clenched. She had seen flashes of a great sacrifice in her visions, but the details were always elusive, slipping away like sand through her fingers. She feared what it meant. The day of the election dawned with a strange stillness in the air. The skies, usually alive with the movement of birds and the soft hum of magic, were eerily calm. In Sky City's central plaza, representatives from all three factions gathered to witness what would be a historic event. The leader chosen today would determine the future of Arila. General Tharian stood at the human podium, flanked by his soldiers. His presence was commanding, and his supporters filled the plaza with cheers. He spoke of strength, of unity through power, and of the need for decisive action to save their floating continent. His words rang with authority, and many believed in his vision of a militarized Arila, where humanity led the way to salvation. Elder Kaler took his place next, speaking of harmony, of the need to work together and respect the ancient magics that sustain the land. His voice was calm, soothing, but firm. He spoke of the birdfolk's long history of guiding Arila through troubled times and how only by returning to the natural order could balance be restored. Finally, it was Lyrael's turn. She stepped forward, her silver hair catching the light, and the crowd fell silent. Unlike the others, she did not have a speech prepared. Instead, she spoke from her heart, describing the visions she had seen, or visions of a future where Arila's balance was broken, where the magic that held the continent aloft was consumed by chaos. "I am not a leader in the traditional sense," Lyrael began, her voice soft but carrying across the plaza. "I do not have the experience of General Tharian or the wisdom of Elder Kaler. But I have seen what is coming, and I know that power alone will not save us, nor will diplomacy. The magic of Arila is failing, and if we do not act together, our world will fall." Her words sent a ripple through the crowd. Many were unsure, frightened by her uncertainty, but others were drawn to her honesty. She was the chosen one, the one foretold in Elven prophecy, and despite her inexperience, there was something undeniable about her presence. As the election neared its conclusion, tensions between the factions grew. Tharian's supporters were pushing for immediate action and military control over Sky City to secure its future. Kaler's followers urged patience, diplomacy, and a return to the old ways. Lyrael's backers, though fewer in number, believed in her visions, trusting that she alone could restore the balance. But then, just as the final votes were about to be cast, a massive explosion rocked Sky City. Sky City's foundations trembled violently as the plaza erupted into chaos. The once sturdy platforms began to buckle, and magical currents that had long stabilized the floating metropolis suddenly surged out of control. Towering spires cracked and groaned as sections of the city began to tilt, and the crowd scattered in terror. Tharian was the first to react. His military instincts kicked in as he barked orders to his soldiers, rallying them to protect the humans and secure the area. But it was clear this was no ordinary attack. This was something far worse. Elder Kaler, his wings unfurling in the sudden gusts of wind, tried to calm his people, but the fear was too great. Birdfolk took to the skies, their normally graceful flight now frantic as they searched for safety. Lyrael stood frozen for a moment, her mind overwhelmed with the sheer force of magic that had erupted beneath the city. She had felt it coming in her visions, but she hadn't known when it would strike. The magical explosion was not the result of an ordinary attack, but something deeper, an ancient force that had long been buried beneath Sky City, now violently awakening. Lyriel felt its pulse through her very bones, its rhythm both familiar and terrifying. Her visions had warned her of this, but standing in the midst of it now, she realized just how unprepared she was. The ground beneath her feet buckled, sending cracks rippling through the plaza. Therian shouted orders, his soldiers moving swiftly, their formation tightening around him. "We need to get to the heart of the city," he barked at Larissa, his second in command, who was already signaling their forces to take defensive positions. "Secure the central tower." Larissa nodded, eyes scanning the chaotic scene. The birdfolk soared above, wings cutting through the air as they tried to rally their own, while the wind elves, though fewer in number, stood rooted in place, their connection to the magic of Arla preventing them from fleeing. They, too, could feel the unraveling magic, the delicate balance of their floating continent slipping away. Lyriel's heart raced as she pushed through the crowd, her gaze fixed on the central tower at the heart of Sky City. The explosion had come from beneath it, she was sure of that now. She could still feel the echoes of the magic surging from below, like the beating of a massive heart. Whatever had been buried there, whatever ancient force was now awakening, it was the key to Arla's survival or its destruction. As she reached the base of the tower, her breath caught in her throat. The ground here was torn open, revealing a gaping chasm that led deep into the earth beneath the city. Dark tendrils of magic seeped from the chasm, swirling upward into the sky like smoke. Lyriel could feel the power radiating from it, wild, untamed, and old, far older than anything she had encountered before. "Lyriel!" A voice called out from behind her. She turned to see Elysia, her mentor, rushing toward her, her face pale with fear. "What is happening? What is this magic?" I don't know," Lyriel replied, her voice trembling. "But it's not from this world. It's something ancient, something buried long ago." Elysia's eyes widened as she stepped closer to the chasm, her gaze fixed on the dark magic swirling within. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "This magic. It shouldn't be here. It's been sealed away for a reason." Before Lyriel could respond, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Step back!" Therian strode toward them, his sword gleaming in the dim light. His soldiers flanked him, weapons at the ready. "This is no place for civilians." Elysia bristled, her eyes narrowing at the general. "Civilians? You dare call us that in a moment like this? We are connected to the magic of Arla, far more than your soldiers could ever be." Therian glared at her, his jaw tightening. "Whatever this is, it's clearly dangerous, and I don't intend to let it destroy this city. We need to secure the area and find a way to contain it." Lyriel stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her chest. "This isn't something you can contain with force, General. This magic is too powerful, too ancient. It's connected to the very foundation of our world." Therian turned his sharp gaze on her, his eyes narrowing. "And what do you suggest? That we stand by and let it consume us all?" Lyriel met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. But we need to understand it before we act. If we rush into this, we could make things worse." Therian's lips pressed into a thin line, but before he could respond, a loud rumble shook the ground beneath them. The chasm at the base of the tower widened, more dark magic spilling out, and the very air around them seemed to hum with energy. "We don't have time for debates," Therian growled. "Larissa, get the men ready. We need to descend into that chasm and find the source of this magic." Elysia stepped in front of Lyriel protectively. "You can't just go down there blindly. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then explain it to me," Therian snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin. But before Elysia could respond, Lyriel stepped forward again, her eyes focused on the swirling magic. "I can feel it," she said quietly. "This magic. It's calling to me. I think I can guide us through it." Therian looked at her skeptically, but there was no time for hesitation. The ground continued to quake, the city's structure groaning under the strain. Finally, with a reluctant nod, he motioned for his soldiers to stand down. "Fine, you lead. But if you falter, we take control." Lyrael nodded, though the weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her. She had never led anyone before, never taken on such responsibility. But as she gazed into the dark abyss, she knew she had no choice. The magic was beckoning her, pulling her in, and she had to follow. With Therian's soldiers flanking them, Lyrael, Elysia, and Therian made their way toward the chasm. The descent was slow and treacherous, the air growing colder and more oppressive the deeper they went. The walls of the chasm were jagged, as if torn apart by some unimaginable force, and the further they descended, the more unstable the ground beneath them became. The dark tendrils of magic writhed around them like living things, and every now and then, Lyrael would feel a sharp jolt of energy as one of them brushed against her skin. It was disorienting, and more than once, she stumbled, but each time, she pushed herself forward, knowing that turning back wasn't an option. As they reached the bottom of the chasm, the source of the dark magic came into view. In the center of a vast underground chamber stood an ancient stone altar, covered in strange runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. The air around it crackled with energy, and the dark magic seemed to pour from it, swirling upward like a never-ending storm. Lyrael felt a chill run down her spine as she approached the altar. This was Ida, the source of the magic that was tearing Errol apart. But how could she stop it? The magic was too powerful, too wild. She could feel it coursing through her, tugging at her very soul, as if it wanted to consume her. Therian stepped forward, his sword drawn. "What is this place?" he muttered, his voice filled with both awe and unease. Elysia's eyes were wide with fear. "This is older than any magic I've ever seen. It's been sealed away for centuries. Why is it surfacing now?" Lyrael took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to think, had to find a way to stop this before it was too late. But the answer eluded her. The magic was too chaotic, too uncontrolled. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I think I'm the one who has to stop it." Therian shot her a sharp look. "You? How?" Lyrael met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know yet, but I can feel it. This magic. It's connected to me somehow." Before Therian could respond, the ground beneath them began to tremble again, more violently this time. The walls of the chamber groaned as cracks spread through the stone, and the dark magic flared, surging toward them. "We're out of time," Therian said grimly. "Do whatever you need to do." Now, Lyrael stepped forward, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the magic pulling at her, trying to draw her in, and for a moment, she hesitated. This could be the end. If she made the wrong move, if she failed, Errol would fall. But she couldn't let that happen. With a deep breath, she placed her hands on the altar, the cold stone biting into her skin. Instantly, the magic surged through her, a torrent of power so intense it nearly knocked her off her feet. She gasped, her vision blurring as the magic overwhelmed her senses. But she held on, digging her fingers into the stone, refusing to let go. The magic was wild, untamed, but as it coursed through her, she began to understand it. This was the power that had held Errol aloft for centuries, the magic that had kept the floating continent stable. But something had disturbed it, something had thrown it out of balance. Lyrael closed her eyes, focusing on the flow of the magic, feeling its rhythm, its pulse. Slowly, carefully, she began to guide it, to calm it, to restore the balance that had been lost. It was a delicate process, and every second felt like a lifetime, but she couldn't stop now. She had to keep going. The dark magic writhed around her, resisting her control, but she pushed back, her will stronger than the chaos that threatened to consume her. She could feel the balance shifting, the magic beginning to stabilize, but it wasn't enough. There was still something missing, something she hadn't yet discovered. And then, In a sudden flash of understanding, she saw Ida the sacrifice. The magic couldn't be controlled, not fully, without a price. Someone had to give themselves to it, had to merge with the ancient force that powered Erla. Lyriel's heart clenched. This was the sacrifice she had seen in her visions, the one she had feared. It had to be her. She was the only one connected enough to the magic, the only one who could make the choice. With a deep, steadying breath, she made her decision. The magic surged one final time, enveloping her in its dark tendrils, but this time, she didn't resist. She let it take her, let it consume her, becoming one with the ancient force. As she did, she felt the balance restore itself, the magic settling into a calm, steady rhythm. The floating continent of Erla stabilized, the trembling earth beneath Sky City growing still. But Lyriel was gone. Tharian and Elysia stood in stunned silence as the dark magic faded, the altar now cold and still. The city above them had been saved, the balance restored, but at a great cost. Elysia fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She did it, she whispered. She saved us. Tharian sheathed his sword, his face hard and unreadable. At what price? The weight of Lyriel's sacrifice hung heavy in the air as they made their way back to the surface. Sky City stood tall once more, its spires gleaming in the light of the setting sun. But the peace was fragile, and the future uncertain. The people of Erla would remember this day, the day the Chosen One gave herself to save them all.